You wake up in the middle of the night. The room is completely silent. For a moment, you stare at the ceiling, wondering what time it is. You roll over, check your phone, and see 2:17 a.m. Immediately, a familiar thought races through your mind. Why am I awake? I have to get back to sleep. You close your eyes tighter. You count backwards. You flip the pillow to the cool side. Every minute that passes feels like a problem waiting to grow. By morning, you convince yourself that something is wrong with your sleep. But what if nothing is wrong at all? What if waking up in the middle of the night isn't a flaw? What if it's one of the oldest human behaviors still hidden inside your brain? For thousands of years, people didn't sleep the way we do today. They didn't expect 8 uninterrupted hours. Instead, they lived through the night in 2 completely different chapters. A first sleep, a quiet period of wakefulness, then a second sleep before sunrise. This wasn't a strange habit practiced by a few isolated communities. It was so common that people barely thought about it. Writers mentioned it. Doctors described it. Families planned their evenings around it. And yet today, almost nobody remembers it ever existed. Somewhere between the glow of campfires and the glow of smartphone screens, humanity forgot an entire way of sleeping. Tonight, we're going back, not just hundreds of years, but tens of thousands of years, to a world with no streetlights, no alarm clocks, no glowing windows stretching across the horizon. Only darkness, fire, the stars above, and the rhythm that shaped every human life. Imagine standing outside after sunset in prehistoric Africa. The air grows cooler with every passing minute. Birdsong slowly fades away. Insects replace it with an endless chorus. Far away, predators begin to move through the darkness. Without electricity, night isn't simply darker. It feels alive. Your ancestors couldn't press a switch and fill the landscape with light. The fire beside them illuminated only a tiny circle. Beyond that circle waited uncertainty. Every sound mattered. Every shadow demanded attention. Night wasn't an empty gap between 2 busy days. It was part of survival itself. As the flames settled into glowing embers, families gathered close together. They shared stories, repaired simple tools, watched the fire carefully. Then, one by one, they drifted into sleep. But something surprising happened a few hours later. Many of them woke naturally, not because of danger, not because they had insomnia, simply because their bodies expected to wake. There was no panic, no frustration, no fear that tomorrow would be ruined. This quiet period was peaceful. Some people added wood to the fire. Some whispered with family members. Others reflected on dreams that felt especially vivid after the first sleep. After an hour or two, they returned to bed and slipped naturally into a second sleep that lasted until dawn. If you had traveled back in time and told them that one day people would believe uninterrupted sleep was the only healthy way to rest, they probably wouldn't have understood what you meant. Because for most of human history, sleeping twice wasn't unusual. It was simply being human. But if this pattern was once completely normal, why did the entire world abandon it? For a long time, scientists believed this idea of 2 separate sleeps was just another story from history, an old custom, a forgotten tradition, nothing more. Then researchers started looking closer, and they found something remarkable. Across hundreds of old books, letters, court records, poems, and medical journals, the same strange phrase kept appearing. First sleep, and just a little later, second sleep. The writers never bothered to explain what those words meant. They didn't have to. Everyone already knew. It was as ordinary as saying breakfast or dinner. In a diary, someone might write that they visited a neighbor after their first sleep. A doctor might recommend taking medicine between the first and second sleep. A farmer could mention checking on his animals before returning to his second sleep. Nobody described this as unusual, because it wasn't. One of the historians who brought this forgotten habit back into public attention was Roger E. Kirch. While studying life before the Industrial Revolution, he noticed that references to first sleep and second sleep appeared again and again in documents spanning hundreds of years. The evidence wasn't limited to one country. It appeared across Europe, and similar patterns have been reported in other parts of the world as well. It suggested something much bigger than a local tradition. It pointed toward a sleep pattern that may have been deeply connected to the human body itself. But history wasn't the only clue. Modern science offered another. In the 1990s, psychiatrist Thomas Wehr conducted an unusual experiment. Instead of exposing volunteers to long evenings filled with artificial light, he recreated conditions that humans experience before electricity. For several weeks, participants spent about 14 hours each day in darkness. At first, their sleep looked much like ours, but after a few weeks, something changed, without anyone teaching them, without anyone suggesting it. Their bodies naturally settled into two distinct periods of sleep. They slept for several hours, woke calmly for roughly 1 or 2 hours, then fell asleep again until morning. Even more surprising, during that quiet period in the middle of the night, participants weren't anxious. They didn't feel stressed. Their brains entered a deeply relaxed state. Researchers observed high levels of prolactin, a hormone associated with calmness, comfort, and relaxation. Instead of feeling exhausted, people often describe themselves as peaceful, almost meditative. Imagine that for a moment. Today, millions of people wake at 2 or 3 in the morning, look at the clock, feel panic, and immediately think, "I have insomnia." But thousands of years ago, the exact same experience may have been completely ordinary, not a disorder, not a mistake, simply another chapter of the night. Of course, that raises an even bigger question. If our bodies may still remember this ancient rhythm, what happened that forced billions of people into sleeping 8 uninterrupted hours instead? For tens of thousands of years, darkness controlled human life. When the sun disappeared, the day was over. There were no glowing office buildings, no televisions, no laptops, no endless scrolling through social media. The setting sun was the world's oldest bedtime reminder. That doesn't mean people fell asleep immediately. Around a campfire, families talked, children listened to stories, hunters repaired broken spear points, others quietly watched the flames dance against the darkness. Fire extended the evening, but only by a little. Its light was warm, weak, and limited. Unlike modern LED lights, it couldn't fool the brain into believing it was still daytime. As the fire slowly burned lower, something inside the human body began to change. Deep within the brain is a tiny cluster of cells called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. Think of it as your body's master clock. It constantly watches the amount of light entering your eyes. When darkness arrives, this clock sends a powerful signal. The brain begins releasing melatonin. Your body temperature drops, your muscles relax, your breathing slows. Everything prepares you for sleep. For thousands of generations, this system worked almost perfectly. Sunset meant rest. Sunrise meant activity. Nature set the schedule. Humans simply followed it. But then, everything changed. First came brighter lamps. Then gas lights illuminated city streets. Suddenly, people could stay awake long after sunset. Factories remained open later. Markets stayed busy into the evening. Cities no longer went dark. Then came electricity. With a single switch, humans achieved something no generation before them ever had. They turned night into day. Homes glowed with bright light. Shops stayed open. Entertainment lasted until midnight. Work stretched later than ever before. The human body, however, didn't evolve overnight. Our biology was still expecting darkness, still expecting long nights, still expecting a natural break between two sleeps. Instead, artificial light pushed bedtime later and later. Morning alarms stayed exactly where they were. The result was simple. The quiet waking period disappeared, not because evolution removed it, but because there simply wasn't enough night left. Imagine your ancestors sleeping from sunset until sunrise. Depending on the season, they could spend 11 or even 12 hours between darkness and daylight. Now compare that to modern life. Many people don't go to bed until midnight, yet they still wake at 6. The long night that once allowed two separate sleeps has been squeezed into a single, shorter window. Over time, society adapted. Schools expected one continuous night of sleep. Employers expected workers to be alert at fixed hours. Doctors began describing uninterrupted sleep as the ideal. Eventually, an entire civilization forgot there had ever been another way. But forgetting a habit doesn't necessarily erase it. Sometimes, the body remembers what history forgets, and that may explain why so many people still find themselves staring into the darkness, wide awake, at exactly the same hour their ancestors once peacefully accepted. So if this ancient rhythm still exists inside us, should we be trying to get it back? Imagine this. It's 3 o'clock in the morning. You wake up for no obvious reason. The room is quiet. Your heart isn't racing. You're not in pain. You're simply awake. Within seconds, your mind starts searching for an explanation. Something's wrong. I only have 4 hours left. If I don't fall asleep now, tomorrow is ruined. Ironically, those thoughts are often what keep people awake the longest. The stress hormone cortisol begins to rise. Your heart beats a little faster. Your breathing becomes slightly shallower. What started as a calm awakening slowly turns into anxiety. But what if your brain wasn't trying to sabotage you? What if it was following a rhythm that once made perfect sense? Sleep researchers have found that waking briefly during the night is remarkably common. In fact, healthy sleepers often wake several times without remembering it. Most of these awakenings last only a few seconds. Others can last several minutes, and for some people, they stretch even longer. That doesn't automatically mean something is wrong. Your brain is constantly monitoring the environment. Throughout human history, that ability helped people survive. A strange sound, the smell of smoke, an approaching predator, a crying child. Completely shutting off awareness for 8 straight hours would have been risky in a world filled with uncertainty. Instead, human sleep evolved as something flexible, deep enough to restore the body, light enough to respond when necessary. Even today, your ancestors' survival system hasn't disappeared. It still listens, it still watches, it still wakes you from time to time. Modern sleep laboratories have revealed another fascinating detail. Sleep isn't one long, unchanging state. Every night, your brain moves through repeating cycles. Light sleep, deep sleep, REM sleep, where most vivid dreams occur. Then the cycle begins again, roughly every 90 minutes. You're constantly moving between different levels of consciousness. In other words, your brain is already changing gears all night long. The idea of sleeping in one perfectly continuous block is much less simple than most people imagine. Of course, this doesn't mean everyone should intentionally wake themselves in the middle of the night. Modern life is different. Most people have fixed work schedules, school responsibilities, and limited time for sleep. Trying to force a two-part sleep pattern without enough total sleep could leave you exhausted. The real lesson is something else. Sometimes the greatest source of stress isn't waking up. It's believing that waking up is abnormal. Understanding how humans slept in the past can replace fear with perspective. Instead of fighting every brief awakening, you can recognize that your body may simply be doing something it has practiced for thousands of generations. But there is one more mystery. If two sleeps were once so natural, what finally convinced the entire world that 8 uninterrupted hours became the only correct way to sleep? The change didn't happen because human biology suddenly evolved. It happened because society did. For thousands of years, people lived by the rhythm of the sun. Time was flexible. If winter brought longer nights, people often slept longer. If summer arrived with early sunrise, the day simply began earlier. Nature was the clock. Then the world became obsessed with something new: time itself. As towns grew into cities and factories spread across Europe and North America, life began running on schedules instead of sunlight. Factory whistles replaced birdsong. Clocks replaced the rising sun. Workers were expected to arrive at the exact same minute every morning. Whether they had slept well or not no longer mattered. The Industrial Revolution transformed sleep into something that had to fit around work, not the other way around. Night became shorter, evenings became brighter, and waking in the middle of the night became inconvenient instead of ordinary. By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, another powerful influence appeared: modern medicine. Doctors began studying sleep in scientific laboratories. At the same time, society increasingly valued efficiency, productivity, and routine. The idea of one long, uninterrupted night's sleep gradually became the ideal, not because ancient sleep had been disproved, but because modern life demanded consistency. Today, that expectation is everywhere. Sleep tracking watches give us scores. Phone apps monitor every movement. Advertisements promise the perfect 8 hours. Many people wake up and immediately judge their night by a single number. 7 hours? Too little? 8 hours? Success. But the human body doesn't always follow perfect numbers. Some healthy adults naturally need a little more sleep. Others need a little less. Age, genetics, health, stress, and environment all play a role. What matters most is not whether every night looks identical, but whether your body consistently gets enough restorative sleep. Scientists also emphasize that sleep quality is often just as important as sleep duration. A person who sleeps deeply for 7.5 hours may feel far better than someone who spends 8.5 hours tossing and turning. The goal isn't to chase a perfect statistic. It's to support the way your own body functions best. So, was the ancient 2-sleep pattern better? Not necessarily, and neither is the modern 8-hour block for everyone. Each developed under very different conditions. Our ancestors lived in darkness, followed seasonal daylight, and had few fixed schedules. We live in brightly lit cities, work by the clock, and often stay connected every hour of the day. The challenge isn't choosing between ancient life and modern life. It's understanding that the human body still carries echoes of the past. And those echoes may explain experiences that many people mistakenly think are failures. But perhaps the most surprising lesson has nothing to do with history. It has everything to do with how we think about sleep tonight. Tonight, before you go to bed, think about this. For almost your entire life, you've probably believed there was only one correct way to sleep. Close your eyes. Stay asleep. Wake up exactly 8 hours later. Anything else feels like failure. But history tells a very different story. For thousands of generations, humans experienced the night in ways that would seem strange to us today. They accepted darkness instead of fighting it. They listened to the sounds around them. They rested when their bodies asked for rest. And if they woke in the middle of the night, they didn't immediately assume something was broken. They simply lived through that quiet moment. Then, when their bodies were ready, they fell asleep again. That doesn't mean modern people should abandon alarm clocks or try to recreate prehistoric life. The world has changed, our responsibilities have changed, and our schedules often demand a single, consolidated night's sleep. But perhaps our expectations haven't kept pace with what science is teaching us. Many sleep experts now agree on an important point. Occasionally waking during the night can be completely normal. It doesn't automatically mean you have insomnia. It doesn't automatically mean you're unhealthy. And it certainly doesn't mean your body has failed you. Sometimes, the worst part isn't waking up. It's the fear that follows, the constant checking of the clock, the racing thoughts, the frustration. Ironically, those reactions can keep you awake far longer than the awakening itself. Your ancestors had no glowing clock beside the bed, no phone waiting to steal their attention, no app telling them whether they had earned a good night's sleep. They simply trusted the rhythm of the night. Modern science doesn't suggest we should return to prehistoric living, but it does remind us of something surprisingly comforting. The human body is incredibly adaptable. It has adapted to ice ages, to deserts, to forests, to farms, to cities, and now to a world that never truly becomes dark. Yet beneath all those changes, pieces of our ancient biology still remain. Every heartbeat, every breath, every dream, every sleep cycle. They're quiet reminders of a journey that began long before cities, electricity, or even written language. So the next time you find yourself awake in the middle of the night, don't panic immediately. Take a slow breath. Remember that millions of people before you once greeted that same silence without fear. Your body may simply be echoing a rhythm that carried humanity through thousands of years, a rhythm that helped our ancestors survive beneath open skies, beside fading campfires, and under stars brighter than most of us will ever see. Perhaps the real mystery isn't why ancient humans slept twice every night. Perhaps the mystery is how quickly we forgot they ever did. And maybe, just maybe, your next midnight awakening isn't a sign that something is wrong. It might be a quiet whisper from the oldest part of being human.